What's going on, and welcome to the R&D Podcast, where myself, Robert Schmitz, and Danny Cortez are going to talk through all kinds of things to do with mortgage and real estate in the DFW area, though some of this will apply to markets outside of Dallas as well. I mean, Danny, it sounds like such a stuffy topic, but I love home buying and everything to do with it. I mean, for crying out loud, the American dream involves that home that you buy, right? Absolutely. And it's so fun getting the chance to help people find that first home and find something, in my case, that's affordable to them. But tell me how you got into this. How you doing? How's your day been?
Everything's good. Just living another day in the real estate life. Wake up every morning, and this is why I'm here. I want to help people follow that dream, like you said. And well, let me start off with how I got here. So it was something that's always been in my mind to get going on investing in one way or another. And we all see real estate as this animal that, who knows, right? There's so many questions, so many things we don't know about. So I was a little hesitant on how I could get started myself. One day I decided that with a lot of news coming up with everything going so crazy hot in the market, kind of in the COVID area, things like that, I wanted a little bit of a piece of that pie. So I got my license. I'm here with App Properties Texas here in Dallas. It's one of the most well-known brokers here. And we do have a lot of experience in this industry. And I decided to really get going on it and see what I could do to make a difference and help people, like you're saying. So what I want to focus on for myself is, I said, let me get people in somehow. And where can we start in this journey as a home buyer, first-time home buyer? What can we do to dip your toes in the water? And there's all sorts of ways of doing it, which we'll discuss. But that's essentially what I wanted to do, is to help people get started one way or another, whether it's really, really small, depending on what they want to do. There's all sorts of ways of doing it.
Right. And speaking of being a first-time home buyer, I mean, you've bought a property. Right. Talk us through your experience on what it was like becoming a first-time home buyer.
Right. I can tell you that it was a lot easier than people expect. I know it can sound a little scary, but with the right information and the right people behind your back, it can be easy. And I feel like that's what we need more of, is having that information ready when you do come across these challenges. You know how to handle it, right? Right. And for me, being a real estate agent, already, had that role in my hand. It did help a lot, but if somebody was there for me and if I didn't know what I was doing, I think I would have really appreciated that. Right. Overall, pretty seamless. Now, I gotta say, I was a little bit lucky. Not a lot of bumps on the road, but there are gonna come some things with every situation that's very different. And that's when you could use the help of a realtor, a finance expert like you in the mortgage industry to help you tackle those things. But overall, I think it was a really seamless experience.
Well, that's what I thought was so funny, is you talked about how you bought a house after you were a realtor. I bought my first house before I was a mortgage person. My only house, I should say. So I've only bought one house, right? Yeah. But so within that, I mean, I had that experience of walking around in a dark room, because that's what it feels like when you're buying your first house. You've dreamed your whole life, or at least given some thought to what it's going to be like to buy that house. And then there's so many rules. Yeah. Like, you just walk into an open house, look at the house, and suddenly offer $360,000 that aren't yours. And it costs you $15,000 down, and in some cases that is, and maybe it costs you $10,000 in closing. So all in all, you could be looking at $25,000, and somehow you got something worth $360,000. Like, home buying is wild. Yeah, and it feels to me like, as corny as it is, because it's pretty corny, Danny, let's be honest. Yeah. The right people really make all the difference. Yeah. Because when you have people that explain to you how the system works, I feel like you as a home buyer get to make all of the decisions. I remember, I worked with a couple different lenders, ultimately settling on the lender that I ended up going to work for. But within that, I had the experience of being offered something and not knowing why, and having to have my wife stall on the phone as I crept away and called my mom and said, "Is 3.5% a good interest rate? Because I don't know anything."
You still have those interest rates.
Oh my gosh, it was the best. But all that to say that it's wild to see the difference in how good people can really lead you forward.
Right.
And that's not to say that there aren't phenomenal realtors and mortgage people all throughout the city of Dallas, but I know there are plenty of people who they hear one thing and then the deal comes back and it's not what they expected. And I value transparency a lot. Absolutely. I don't know how you feel. I feel like the modern home buyer really cares about making sure that they get exactly the deal that was described to them.
Right.
And to me, that's got to be a pillar of your business right now.
Definitely.
Right.
Yeah. Having clarity all the way through. I mean, the seller side's very important too, right? The sellers want to know what they're going to make at the end of the day. So having that finance sheet and knowing what number is going to be there when they're at the closing table, they expect punctuality of exactly what we want to get paid at the end of the day. And it works on that side too.
I mean, it's so funny, Danny. It's like home buying is almost like playing Monopoly, right? Like there are no rules except for the few rules that you have, and nearly anything goes. You walk through the house and you want their couch, well, you can ask for that.
Right. Everything's negotiable in real estate.
Right. You see a big old crack in the wall after you've already agreed to a price and then you want to renegotiate that price, well, you can try. Right. The seller may not let you do it, but you're well within your rights to ask. Exactly. I mean, I've seen people get cars included in real estate deals. I've seen massive concessions. You've won some massive concessions for some clients. And a concession, by the way, is when, say, you're going to buy a $400,000 house, but you get the seller to agree to pay $20,000 of closing costs. That means that maybe you buy your rate down a little bit. You go from what could now be 7.5% down to 6.75%. Save yourself maybe $200 a month?
It makes a difference in the long run.
Oh, and
that's what's been hot right now. It's getting a good deal.
Right. Yeah. And the sellers, they want to help. I mean, they want to get their house sold. Absolutely. Right? Yeah. And you talked about clarity. Man, I was in on a deal just the other day where the buyer came forward with a pre-qualification letter and it looked solid, but as things happen in real estate, the loan ended up not being quite what the buyer expected it to be. They told me after the fact, because I was talking to the seller's realtor. But within that, the sellers now have to relist their house. And so they lose what was 50 days of their life. They stressed out and all they ended up with was some earnest money in their pocket. Right. And that's no fun for anybody. Like, it is wild to remember that the buyer in a really good transaction is at odds with the seller. Like, you're working together to get a win-win. Absolutely. It sounds so hokey. Yeah. But man, that is everything.
That's with everything in life, right? Not just real estate. You always want to create that win-win situation. I feel like that's out there in every book that you want to read. It's true. I mean, if I'm over here doing something else that's not even real estate related, I want you to get something out of it too, right? Because I want it to work for both of us. Right. No delays, no nothing, and an even transaction that's fair for you and fair for me.
Now, okay, you were talking to me before we started recording this, Danny, about 401ks. Sure. And I think that's a super interesting topic, if only because I feel like there are so many people our age out there. Look, I'll admit, I'm 28 years old, about to be 29, woo-woo. And when you say 20% down payment, because did you grow up in the same world I did, where people acted like 20% down was like what you needed to buy a house?
It was such a false thing. I don't know what it is, but everyone that I come across is on the newer side, and that's okay. You know, you're not loaded with all the up-to-date information. You don't need that much. It's not...
Well, you don't have that much. Yeah. I didn't have $80,000. Exactly. Are you kidding me?
Today's price points, I get it.
Oh, I mean, you got to do what you got to do. And like, I could spit stuff about programs like how FHA, that's the Federal Housing Administration, has loans that'll go down as low as 3.5% while still bringing interest rates down. And recently, the Biden administration lowered the PMI costs on FHA loans by about 30, well, they call it percent, but it doesn't work that way. But so what used to be on, say, $350,000 loan, $250 a month in PMI, mandatory, regardless of down payment, came down to about $170. And that critical $80 a month has swung a lot of loans to be FHA favored. And even at 3.5% down, you can get some killer seller's concessions. Yeah. I digress. Right. The point is that even without that, even without talking about loan programs, down payment you don't need $80,000.
Yeah.
You're not going to have $80,000. And in many cases, you can qualify for something that will help you build that equity and help prep you for retirement. Is that too corny to talk about?
Not really. No.
Renting just doesn't ultimately get you the wealth that I think people need so that they can ultimately retire. It's a big gamble to consider your house an asset. It's probably going to feel like a liability for the first couple of years at least.
And I think it kind of is to a certain point. I mean, if I would comment on that, I think it's technically a liability in my eyes, but you can make that into an asset. And those are things we can talk about later on and how to do that. There's plenty of ways to really say that's an asset because you have people living in there or things like that. You set it up to a point where it works for you.
Well, you just recently had a client who not only bought a condo that fit their budget, but then they're renting out the other half of it. And so they're ending up paying less than they would in rent for exactly the same place, well less, while still building equity. I mean, I actually kind of hate the words building equity because I heard it so many times growing up that it sounds like snake oil. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. But then at the end of the day, if Dallas housing prices go up, condo prices go up, you could be sitting on $40,000, $50,000 of equity. And I mean, that's a year's salary in many cases, Danny. Exactly. Like the real estate money isn't fake, despite how fake it'll feel sometimes. You know what I'm saying?
And when you said it's a little bit of gamble, I think that's what you're mainly talking about.
Right.
If it goes up, great, you win, right? I mean, there's taxes and things like that, insurance, which are always going to be there. But if you come out of it with a gain, great. I mean, you took that gamble, and I think it's a good thing. But at the end of the day, you're so right. I mean, there's ways to also house hack, and that's another conversation we can have with the whole renting thing and having somebody pay part of that mortgage. There's plenty of ways to really sneak in there and make more money.
Well, okay, let me give you a chance to spiel then. Like, what are some good... So there's going to be the people out there, just like I was, freshly married, one or both of you is working, what in the mortgage world we call a W-2 paid job. So that describes your tax form at the end of the year. What you need to care about is if you work for a big company like AT&T or even a small company like, I don't know, Cortez Industries, but you don't own that company, they're going to pay you a salary. They pay you $100,000 per year. I care about your gross numbers, which rather than your after-tax numbers, which if you're aggressive means that you can qualify for a little more than maybe your budget says you can, because if the government takes 30% in tax, I can show the whole number despite how much you do and don't get. Anyways, those people are going to be able to rationalize qualifying for and buying a house, I think, a little easier than people who have $10,000 in their bank account and they've got a decent paying salary, of course, but I mean, down payment, closing costs, like that's a lot of money. Yeah. What is a way to house hack? Talk me through house hack.
I'll share you a little personal experience because I was a big proponent of this. I mean, I think it's a great way to get in and just not shell out so much money every month. I know it's great to own a home and you get really excited and it's a piece of something, right? But if you really want to get into how you can save a lot, and there's a couple of things that some people may be okay with and not, which I'll discuss. But the first thing you can do right away is utilize that extra space. Maybe there isn't a ton of duplexes out there, and in a city like Dallas, inventory is slim, right? You're not going to find that perfect duplex where you can live on one side, rent the other one. We're talking big cash there. But if you're a little more humble about it, starting a condo like I did, right? You get into a condo, you get a good roommate, a friend, a best buddy, whatever it is, get a family member to help you out. You get in there and you rent that other space, that room that you have, and there you go. You are splitting the cost. Maybe you do 50-50, depending on the situation. If you have the master, it's a little bit bigger. Give them a little break, right? Maybe they're family, you want to help them out. Whatever the situation is utilize the value of your home. And I think once you utilize that value, that's when you convert something into that asset, right?
Because like you're talking about, if you find a way to effectively replicate your rental situation, but instead you own the property, you're coming out ahead over time. Exactly. It's folks that pay dramatically more for homes than they do rent. I mean, honestly, Danny, even then, I mean, granted, I'm obviously pretty real estate pilled. at this point. So like I'm pro purchasing. If I'm somebody who's really big on, if you don't own any property, then you should look at what it would take for you to own one property. Sure. Chaining 1 to 2, 2 to 3 gets harder, but you got to remember the government subsidizes your primary residence mortgage so hard that what should be a 9.5, what should be a 10% loan with discount points built in just to buy it can be, even in today's incredibly high rates, as low as 7.5%. So that critical 2% you're saving can represent, Danny, in many cases, $500 a month that you're not paying. Exactly. And so that's not to say it's going to be cheap, but rent can go up at the landlord's will. Like you hope at the end of the year that they don't raise rent 15, 20%, but they could. And if you don't get out of that cycle, if you don't get something fixed, then eventually you run the risk that you're going to get run out of where you call home. And to me, getting out of the rental, like roller coaster, the circle, if you will, like I found it a huge mental relief that I knew exactly what I needed to be saving for, exactly what my payments were going to be, and everything to do with that.
Yeah, I won't go on a tangent here, but speaking of that subsidy, the tax homestead, that's a little bit of savings there too, right? So there's going to be little savings along the way. Yeah, maybe you're paying a little bit more, but you'll get some help along the way.
You're paying a little more now. Yeah. I mean, rates are eventually going to drop. And the moment that they do, refinance, if anybody's watched The Big Short, if anybody's basically had any conversation with anybody about a house, you're going to hear this term refinance and people are going to make it sound like voodoo magic. I don't blame anybody. I mean, it is a consequence of the mortgage-backed security because we love loans. We love loans. We love originating loans. Like we as an economy just love loans and giving them out, and banks love writing them, and one investor wants a loan, so therefore they will pay for the new loan that will pay off the old loan. And that's effectively what real estate is. It is taking your old loan and replacing it with a new loan, taking that money out, paying off your other one, and now you have this loan. Meaning, Danny, that maybe it's summer 2024. I know that's been an optimistic date that some people have looked at, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's winter 2025. If you bought today, eventually you bring in your payment down. And you look at a situation like COVID rates, somebody who owned their house for 10 years, 15 years, still got the benefits of what became at that point nearly 2.75% rates. And now their forever home is truly forever. I mean, you can make housing work for you eventually. I know it's scary to jump into.
Yeah. And if you zoom out, I think that's what you're trying to say. When you look at the bigger picture, zoom out at like what rates do over time, but what you can do along the way of having that ownership for a longer period of time, holding on to something can benefit you down the line as things get cheaper for you.
Absolutely. I mean, man, Danny, like if you own a piece of property, it means, so we're in Dallas. We're in, last I checked, it was the second hottest city in America. I think it has
one of the hottest, right?
I think it's bumped Austin, but you'll have to fact check me on that. And this stuff changes. Maybe I looked at the wrong website, but they were saying Dallas was second, and I can't remember who was first. But within that, you would think that once rates fall, housing prices are going to balloon. They're going to go off like a stick of dynamite. And that's just a natural consequence of people wanting houses. Because Danny, if you put in an offer at asking, and I say, well, I want to beat him, so I'm going to put in an offer 5% over asking. And then somebody from California says, you can get that for $400,000. In Cali, it costs $600,000. So
perspective is so different.
I'll put in an offer for $475,000.
Yeah.
Now you've just increased the house percentage. Back of the napkin math says nearly 15%. And that's the market now. Yeah. Because the appraiser comes in and they say, well, that house sold for $475,000. So that's what it's worth now.
Yeah. And if you want to get more into like the first steps, I mean, this is something we could clarify, and for our viewers, maybe they're wondering like, what is it today? Like, and I'll let you go first. Maybe like, what is it you think somebody can do today to get into the real estate world? Like, what are the options for somebody? Maybe they want to save, like you mentioned, that 401k. There are ways to get started today on a small scale to build that up into one day get something bigger out of it.
So in the world of not being scary, we'll save the 401 conversation for just a little bit. But you can talk to me for free. I mean, if you could give me a call, shoot me a text, shoot me an email, we can easily set up a time where we can go through your financial situation, figure out what your credit is and isn't. Maybe we'll even save pulling credit for a time when you're more comfortable with it, so that we can ideate a time to buy a house and figure out what you do qualify for, what do you want, how can we save the most money as you go about wanting that, and what loan program works for you? Because there are a million ways that you can structure these things. You can basically trade things off. More down payment means lower monthly payment. Less down payment may mean higher monthly payment, but maybe we can subsidize that early part of the monthly payment. Everything is worth the conversation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then they can, whoever's talking to you, they can discuss what they're planning to do maybe later down in 10 years. Right. Like, if you have this goal in mind in 10 years to do X, Y, and Z, your first step's here, but then you can use that equity, let's say, for something else, right? So I think you're going to offer a lot of valuable information in that perspective.
Within that, I mean, the best news is that the conversation is free. It doesn't cost you $600 to give me a call. I'm not going to bill you hourly. Like, as far as the way you and I, because I like transparency, get rewarded for our services, that comes at the closing table, not any time before, which I think helps us, because it means that until you get exactly what you want, we're not done. And we've got all the incentive in the world. I mean, what better way could you structure it, right?
Clients first, they win.
Clients first, they win, we win. And in the world of mortgage, I mean, you can get creative as far as qualifying you for the income that you have or the down payment you have. Do you know that you can actually make a down payment contribution directly from your 401k without having to pay taxes on it? It's a little more complicated than that, and it can depend situation to situation, but it means, Danny, that if you have scrapped and scraped to save $10,000 only to find out you need $18,000 to buy a house, but you have $50,000 in your 401k, you have options. And in my world, options are king.
And then in my point of view, as far as, what we could do today is using the real estate agent to help you look at what's out there, right? Like, what is it realistically after we get the numbers, what we can buy today? And then we can kind of play with scenarios and seeing what you want to, which stepstone you want to take. But obviously those house hacks that we mentioned that we can go on another whole show about to see what you can get the best bang for your buck and save a lot of money that way. But really just using us as an example is a great way to get going and talk to somebody to see what your options are.
And Danny, I don't think a good real estate agent gets enough credit. Honestly, I've heard too many people that'll act like, and if you've done this before, just know I'm thinking about you, that they'll act like a real estate agent is a glorified show person. That would be great if home buyers knew the Dallas market near as well as an experienced professional does. I mean, if I came to you saying that I want this, or that, and you looked at, I want to live in Lake Highlands, I want to pay $350,000, I want to not have to deal with any of the stuff that comes from competitive house buying, and by the way, I want to pay like really, really, really low amount. You might look at that and say, well, that doesn't really exist. But what are you looking for in Lake Highlands? I probably know of a community that might suit you, or an area that might fit where you want to be that'll fit that price range. And if not, we can talk about what you want from your, or like how we can mold your price range to get you something that you do want. I feel like there's so many people that lately act like realty is just plenty of people's part-time job, and it blows off how good really, really good professionals are. Those are the people that'll save you probably $40,000. And I mean, isn't that what you want a professional to do?
That's why we're here, right? We're doing our jobs effectively and passing that on to our clients, right? Like, I think that's what's important. Well, what would you say? I know we're a little bit early here on some of the data that's going to come out soon. I know some of y'all who are looking to listen to this here are rolling into the weekend. There's going to be a lot of buyer activity. Hopefully, now that we're getting out of the summer, things are picking back up. But we want to get you up to a speed of what's going to happen here. I know you mentioned the consumer price index's numbers should be updating soon.
Well, yeah, we should see CPI come out on Wednesday, but as the economy has stalemated a little bit, because, okay, I'll keep things pretty high level. Starting about this summer, I think people were really looking for the economy to turn towards recession. We saw a lot of industries go through an awful lot of layoffs, never a good thing. And as inflation started to rise and the Federal Reserve started to raise the federal funds rate, which is the borrowing costs for banks in a very tiny little sentence, it certainly seemed as if we were headed towards a very 2008-esque recession. Not a crash, right. We hoped, maybe closer to 2011, right? Sure. The Great Recession not so long ago. But jobs have been so resilient. Right. Unemployment numbers are not near high enough to signal recession. So we have this, and people are still spending. Right. We have this really strong economy in the wake of really high inflation numbers. So it feels like a bit of a Mexican standoff, sure. Right? Yeah. Like the Wild West, like who's going to move first? Right. And it used to be that all eyes were on the CPI. And if the CPI went or showed too high, that was really bad. If CPI showed lower than expected, that was really great. But right now, factors have gotten complex enough that it's going to take more than just the CPI. And Powell, he's the chairman of the Federal Reserve, seems pretty intense about staying on top of inflation. It's probably best for the health of the country anyways. But in the world of rates, I would love to tell you that things are right about to break and spill down.
I would love to hear that too.
That's what I think we all want. Yeah. But housing data that I just looked at recently shows the refinance index is lower than it's been since the last 20 years. Home purchasing is lower than it's been in the last 20 years. Like, it's a dry time for the market. Yeah. What have you been seeing?
I wish I saw a little more inventory, I will say. But that doesn't mean we should get discouraged by it, right? Like let's the stepping stone, I think, is something we were trying to emphasize is there may not be that perfect home out there, right? But at least we can start somewhere, save money along the way, use someone who knows the information and where you're coming from. And later on, we can get to that second step, right? It's all about taking action now and actually following through with a goal of having real estate in your portfolio, right? Because I agree with you. I think you may not own 10 properties and that's not something you want to do, but if you have a little bit of real estate in your portfolio, investment portfolio, I think it's important to sprinkle a little bit of that in there. So get started now, buy something that fits most of your needs. I would love to say that there's a perfect home out there for everybody, but unless we're really going to build something from scratch on a new build, which is out there, we can talk about many different communities that do offer that. It's going to be quite a bit of a search to find that gem.
And I mean, it really gets complicated, I think, when you're talking about retirement in particular, because investment portfolios, they need to be diverse. And obviously a major element of that can be mutual funds. It can be your 401ks, Roth IRAs. I think you were mentioning something about like a real estate IRA. But what's bonkers to me, and I mean, look, I am not giving financial advice here. I feel like I'm legally required to say that. But many 401ks, Danny, they'll have you on a plan that's going to try to keep about a 5% year-over-year growth. And then if the stock market tanks, like you lose half your 401k overnight. That happened to me during COVID. I remember the common refrain around my office at the time was just don't look at your 401k right now. And so I don't want to spell doom. That's never our goal, right? But Danny, 401ks and common investment strategies are not the sure thing that I think that they're sometimes made out to be.
Sure.
And while that sounds crazy, we haven't seen Dallas housing prices dip beyond like further than 10%. Mm-hmm. We're not far away from the stock market losing nearly 40% of its value. I haven't seen Dallas housing prices dip in anything close to that.
It's pretty resilient, yeah.
It's not as simple as saying line goes up and like dreaming some dream and selling some right. Like pithy, you get what I'm saying? Like this isn't fake. This is real. Like you get a piece of Dallas property and right now you're riding the wave of one of the stronger real estate cities in the United States of America.
Yeah.
It's a huge investment.
What a great way to take advantage of it, right? Like you see the news in California, New York, and things are a little bit different out there. Yeah. But when you look at Dallas, it is just complete. Even Austin, if you want to compare those two, it's not the same game, right? Like there are possibilities out there. There are options that we can take advantage of now and ride that wave, like you're saying. They're just going to continue going. Long term, again, even if it's a higher interest rate, you still come out winning most of the time, at least historically, right? If you go back and check the data, it is a win at the end of the day. So get started on something, right, today, and really go through with your goal of saying, I want to own real estate. I want to get in the game. The action, I think, is more important than learning all day long, listening to us all day long, right? Like, that's great. Use the information, but knowledge is obviously power when you actually apply it and use it.
And plus, I feel like jumping onto real estate is like jumping onto a moving train. Like, you're trying to save up money, but let's say that you set it in your budget that you're going to save $12,000 over the year 2023, which would have been great, except your cousin is going to get married. They asked you to be in the wedding. Like, the flight out there isn't cheap. And of course, you got to rent a tux, and they want $350 for the Airbnb for the bachelorette or bachelor party. And suddenly you only end up saving $7,000. Right. And that money is worth 5% less than it was because of the year's inflation. I mean, I am talking about all the negatives, and I don't say it to be scary. It's more to say that, Danny, I feel like there's this, I'll just rent for another year plan that makes a lot more sense than when you put pen to paper and you realize how hard it is to keep up with real estate growth. Because if the housing price is 15% more this time next year because mortgage rates fell and it jumped up, and you only saved about 3% more, you're behind. And it doesn't get easier. Right. And so I am not saying you need to buy now, because it's always situationally dependent. Yep. But it feels like, Danny, the not knowing is the worst thing that I think somebody could do. Definitely. Like, not having that conversation, not having a plan, not at least asking somebody, especially people that are ready to help. Yeah. How could we make this work? Right. This is something I want to do. How can we make this work? Right?
Because if you want to get lucky, quote unquote, right? I think luck is an intersection, right, of being prepared and seizing that opportunity. Right. And what you could do today is getting prepared with all the latest information, working with the right people. And once that opportunity presents itself, you take it, right? And we can get lucky that way. We can find that real estate luck that we've always been looking for. So I think that's important to keep in mind as well.
I love that. Yeah. Hey, thanks so much for listening, guys. Please do give us some feedback, whether you liked it or, honestly, if you hated it. Let us know in the comment section. You can DM us on Instagram. We want to make one of the best shows that we can for your weekend, for real estate, and for everything in between. Thank you so much. I'm Robert Schmitz. This is Danny Cortez. You guys have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.